o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Pacific time. We have a full hour together and a lot to cover. So we're just going to jump right in. So we already had our first question of the webinar, which is this being recorded? And the answer is yes. So we will send this to everyone that's been registered, whether or not you were able to attend for the full session. And we also upload these to our social media sites, YouTube, and on our website as well. So we will be going through a lot of information today. So if you don't catch it all, do not worry. We will make sure we get you all of this information in multiple ways as soon as we get it up online. So again, I'm David Dodge. I'm the executive editor of Gays with Kids. This is our third in a series of webinars on foster care in honor of Foster Care Awareness Month, which happens every May. So we're very excited to have finally rolled this out. I'd like to just start by giving a little bit of a background for folks that may not be super familiar with Gays with Kids. We are now 7 years old, and we are the largest online magazine and resource for gay, bi, and trans men who are dads or who are interested in becoming dads. And we really started kind of as a show of visibility 7 years ago, as a way to kind of show that it's possible for queer men to become dads, because as you know, or you wouldn't be on this webinar, the paths that are available to us aren't, like you don't just wake up tomorrow and you're a dad, like so many of our straight friends. So, whether it be adoption or foster care or surrogacy, co-parenting arrangements, these are all complicated paths that often involve a lot of other folks and social workers and oftentimes money and resources. And so as we kind of started to grow and our community expanded on Instagram and on Facebook, and our website started to take off with beautiful family stories of queer parents all over the world, we started to hear from a lot of our audience members and followers who were interested in, they were like, great, thanks for the inspiration, but now how do we actually make this a reality for us? And the truth is, at the time, we didn't really have the expertise to be able to walk people through the steps necessary to navigate these very complicated paths to parenthood that are available for queer men. So for the last year and a half, we've really slowed down, and we started scouring the country for the experts that we need in order to walk people through step by step everything they need to know in order to realize their dream of fatherhood according to whatever path is appropriate for them. So we're very excited to have amassed a really incredible team of experts on each of these paths that have helped educate us and help put together some really important videos, resources, blogs. And we really are trying to roll out new resources each and every week on each of these paths, and it's going to be an ongoing process. So we do want to be your one-stop shop, a place that you go to from the minute the fatherhood enters your mind as a possibility, down to the decision point that you're going to go with foster care and with this agency, and you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. So we're very excited to be able to be offering these weekly webinars. So our last in this series will be taking place next week, and it'll be an exploration of one foster parent's journey through the foster care system. We're very excited to be bringing you that. And then we're going to start next month on a series of webinars around surrogacy. So if you're also interested in that path to parenthood, please go to our website. We'll have all of this stuff up. We'll be pushing this out on our social media in the coming weeks as well. So just stay tuned for all of that. But so with that said, so if you have been following this series all month long, by now you've gotten a good overview of the foster care system, which was our first webinar. We're probably overwhelmed by that. So ideally you came to our second webinar, which is specific to fostering older youth in the system, if that's something you're interested in doing, and why you should consider doing so. It was a great conversation. We had some older foster youth in attendance, so I do encourage you to go check that one out if you haven't had a chance to yet. And so we also wanted to do a webinar specific to the training and resources and support that foster parents receive, because this path is actually really unique for LGBTQ, well, any foster parent really, in that there is a lot of support in the system for foster parents that you don't necessarily get if you're pursuing these other paths to parenthood. And so we want to make sure that everyone is really educated about the resources and support that are offered to foster parents if you go this route. Because as you'll hear about a lot later, you will be parenting someone, a child that has had some sort of history of neglect and abuse, and it's critically important that you get all the resources and support and training necessary in order to open your home in the best way possible to these kids that are in need. So again, we'll be going through the training. We'll be going through the much feared home study and try to make that seem less scary to you. We'll talk about the financial support that foster parents get on an ongoing basis, and just what other kind of resources and places that you can educate yourself moving forward. So I'm very excited to be able to introduce our panel of experts here. So again, I am the executive editor of Gays with Kids. We're also joined by Jill Rosenberg, the adoption program supervisor for Extraordinary Families, and Trey, the associate director of kinship and community services at Amara. And then we're also very excited to be joined by a foster dad, Tom Hove, who is a foster dad with the support of Amara. We'll be hearing about his journey, and he can really kind of help contextualize and make real for us what it means to be a foster dad and what the process is like. Trey is also a gay foster dad, so we can hear from his experience as well. So just in terms of process, before I shut up and turn it over to our experts. So again, this is being recorded. We will be spending about 30 minutes overwhelming you with information. If at any point you have a question that pops in your mind, if you use the Q&A function of Zoom, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen, feel free to pop it in right away. I'll be collecting the questions throughout the presentation, and we'll just get through as many of those as possible towards the end of the webinar, which we like to save at least 20 to 30 minutes for. So there'll be plenty of time for that. If we do not get to your question, which is possible, or if I should also, just as a warning, let everyone know that foster care is unique in another way, in that it's a very hyper-localized path. So you will be working with an agency that is licensed in your state or even just in your county. And so, we're going to do the best to give as national of a view as possible. But if you have a super hyper localized question, that may be something we need to find out for you afterwards, which we will be happy to do. So email us at any point if I tell you to do so, if we're not able to answer your question here live, at dads@gayswithkids.com, and we'll make sure to be going through. I'll hand that email address out multiple times over the course of the webinar. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to Jill Rosenberg, who's going to walk us through the first couple steps of the foster care system.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, David. I just want to say how excited I am today to be here, give information. I've been doing this work for a long time. And Gays with Kids has highlighted some of the amazing dads that we've worked with. So this is just up our alley. Love it. All right. So foster care facts. There's an overwhelming 400,000 plus children in the U.S. foster care system. I can tell you, I'm in LA County, one of the biggest counties in the United States, and hotline calls come in. We get about 13,000 calls a month. And about 10,000 of those social workers have to go out and investigate. So child welfare in the United States is very big. And we definitely have a need for foster parents and adoptive parents. So what I'll talk about soon is how the primary goal of foster care is family reunification. So whether a family has the goal of adoption and they're looking to grow their family on a long-term basis, or they're looking to just provide foster care temporarily to help a child who's been separated from their family, oftentimes, the goal is the same, which is family reunification. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how that impacts our families who are hoping to adopt. Over 25% of kiddos have been legally freed for adoption and need permanent homes. Usually the little ones, especially in California, usually end up getting adopted by their first families that foster, which is pretty amazing because that means for those kids, their losses and trauma is minimized. So the kiddos that are available for matching are usually those older kiddos, large, we say older meaning 9 and over, large sibling sets, and kiddos that have special needs, medical, emotional, or developmental. And of course, the reason kids are coming into care is because of suspected neglect and abuse. Most often it's birth parents who are struggling with substance abuse issues. And so we're going to go deeper into the home study, but just to give you an overview, for our dads who are looking to grow their families, the first thing you want to do is find the right agency. And for our gay and queer families, it's really important to find an agency that's not just LGBTQ friendly, but affirming, accepting, inclusive, supportive, an agency that's going to advocate for you in case there is any kind of discrimination that's experienced. And you want a community because it really helps to have more people in the boat, so to speak. So that's the first thing you want to do. So agencies that are working with Human Rights Campaign, All Children, All Families program is a good place to start. So one thing I realized, David, that's missing in the slide is the training. So usually with most agencies, before you start that home study process, you're going to go through lots and lots of education and training, learning about the kiddos that are in care, learning about your role as a foster care or an adoptive parent. And then at some point during that process, you're going to start the home study, which is actually the family assessment. We'll talk more about that in a sec. But the basic and the home study is not to rule people out. It's really about selecting in families. There are plenty of kids, like we said, in child welfare, and we need families, and we need families like you. So most social workers come into this process, you start with an A, essentially, and a really good agency, if there is a hiccup or some kind of concern, they're going to be honest and transparent with you and work with you to talk about how do we get over those hurdles? How can we do this together? It really should be a partnership. Preparing your home, of course, is part of the process. So even if you're an adoptive family, it always starts out with foster care. And it's kind of interesting. I used to say to families that it's like your home is becoming a facility. Some states, there's still, it's actually the state that comes in that licenses the home. In California, we're doing it a little bit differently. But essentially, you're preparing your home not only for safety, but, kind of above and beyond, like medications need to be locked up, toxins and poisons need to be out of reach, usually behind a childproof lock. So it's really about making your home probably safer than most of your friends who have kids. But it's really important because we want to minimize any kind of accident that can happen. And then the next step, whether families, there's kind of two ways to match with a child. A lot of families who want little ones, and by the way, we do get babies. There are babies straight from the hospital. It's an amazing experience for a family who wants to experience parenthood in that way. But the one way in most states to get little ones is to become a foster parent. And that means that a little one comes into your family and, you may not know the outcome. It's a new case. So, but it's one way to start to parent children. And what we like to say in our agency is you're coming to us to parent. So even if your goal is to adopt and be a forever family, the idea is you get to have that experience parenting from the get-go if you become a foster parent. But the other route for families is to be matched with a child who may be legally freed, or the courts are ready to legally free that child, which means they're at the end of the court case and they've explored relatives, they've explored birth parents, and it looks like there are no adults in the child's family that can provide a safe and nurturing environment. So then Child Protective Services are going to look for families who are open to adoption and willing desiring to go through that matching process, which is more of a step-by-step process. It doesn't feel like such an emergency. And there is a process of getting to know the child on paper before you get to meet that child. That's usually, again, with our older kiddos. And then for our families that are really open to taking those little ones, it can be tricky. And again, it's sort of this, families have to do this mindset shift from, I want to grow my family, to, I want to help children while I'm growing my family. Because essentially every family I've ever worked with in 20 years who's wanted to adopt has ended up adopting. It just may not be the first child that comes into their lives, or the second, or the third. One of the greatest dads that is a mentor to a lot of our other families ended up with the fourth child that he parented. And he always said, you know what? This kiddo prepared me. I mean, all the kiddos before this kiddo prepared me for this one. He was an experienced parent by the time his son came to him. It's tricky for our families who want to adopt, because the responsibility and the role is to facilitate that family reunification. But eventually cases, pivot and become that adoption track, and then families can move forward with that process. So a lot of families get so nervous about the home study. And again, this is an opportunity to partner with the agency. And again, agencies are not looking to select out really good social workers are trained to not have biases, keep their implicit biases in check, and to be really open and accepting of all individuals and all types of families. And so I always say to families, don't be nervous. We're just talking. And what we're looking in the home study is, yes, to approve you as an adoptive dad, but to explore with you, what was your own childhood like and how were you parented? How do you think you're going to parent? Are you going to parent similarly to how your parents parented you, or are you going to do it really differently? Families who've had their own adverse childhood experiences are sometimes super nervous about, is that going to be a bad thing? And most agencies will see that as that's a strength. You're going to really be able to empathize with our kiddos who've suffered abuse and neglect. And during the home study process, the social worker is just going to explore with you, how did you cope, especially as an adult with, having that adverse childhood experience, what's your support like, and what are your triggers, and what are your biggest strengths? What are the challenges going to be? So don't worry if you didn't have perfect childhoods. We are not looking for perfect parents. We're looking for parents. There are plenty of kiddos who need families. And so part of that process too is providing additional education and training, because you're going to get generalized education just through the training that the agency provides. But this is a time to do one-on-one to really talk about those issues and put it on the table. Be transparent. A really good social worker is going to appreciate that. And again, have some pretty deep conversations about, let's talk about how a child who's suffered trauma might really push your buttons. And by the way, they will. They will push your buttons. And so the idea is let's plan for these events and help you to be the strongest parent you can be before that child comes to you. Of course, that social worker is going to be preparing you for the reality of this experience, and also be able to answer all those personal questions and walk you through the process. And no matter how you end up adopting, international, domestic, private adoption, a home study is actually the first part. So foster care adoption is no different, that we do that family assessment on the front end, regardless of your path. And I wanted to also say that most social workers who do home study work, adoptions work, do have a clinical background. Then they should have at least some trained therapeutic experience. So we've heard it all, we've seen it all. And again, it's not unusual that a family has had some of their own trauma. So if it doesn't feel safe, then that may not be the right social worker for you or the right agency for you, and self-advocate. Okay, so home study examines more than just your home. In California, we're saying family assessment now, because a lot of people think it's just about their house. The house piece is important, but again, the more important is, getting to know you and your strengths as a family. And again, that education and ongoing training, it doesn't stop when the child comes to you. You want to become an expert on whatever a child presents to you, and you should really get that support from an agency. Families do have a choice to go to a county or a private agency in most states or most areas. If you do have a choice to go to a private agency, I know I'm super biased, but I do feel like agencies do provide more of that one-on-one support. So part of the home study or the family assessment process is getting, physical exams, make sure families are healthy and you're taking care of yourself. It's like we talk about, like on an airplane, you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you put it on the child. So it's all about, we want to make sure families are taking care of their own needs first, physically, mentally, and of course, financial. There's no, minimum income a family has to make. Really, in the family assessment, what we're looking at is, can you support your family before an additional child joins your family? So looking at income and expenses. And so that is, again, there's not a minimum amount of income that a family needs to make. Of course, there's background checks. It is not unusual that we have an applicant who has had a DUI or has had an arrest. Most of those issues can be mitigated. Usually with DUIs, you really want to make sure it's at least 5 or 10 years have gone by since that last DUI, but every agency kind of does that differently. But again, be transparent. At our agency, we always say to families, when you walk in the door, if you think something's going to come up on your arrest record, let us know now so that we're prepared, because oftentimes the state will ask us to apply for an exemption, which most agencies will do on your behalf, but it's good for us to know on the front end. And the other thing is really important to know is adoption clearances are deeper than almost any clearance. So if you've live scanned or fingerprinted for your job, if you're a teacher, and your arrests have never come up, it was expunged, it was dismissed, I promise you on adoption live scans, that arrest is going to come up. They're the deepest kind of scans that we get. And so families are always surprised, like, that's never come up before. So tell your social worker, this thing happened, it's never come up, but it might come up. And at least then it's on the table. They can help navigate that process. And you can expect with the family assessment, there's somewhere between 2 and 4 visits. Right now, we're doing a lot of those virtually, but because of COVID, but as things open up, we'll start to do those in person. And again, those shouldn't feel like interviews. It really should feel like a conversation, because it really is just a get to know you. And so don't be nervous about it. Be yourself.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. All right, so now we're going to hand it over to Trey and Amara, who's going to walk us through the last part of our presentation here, which will focus on some of the resources, supports, and also a little bit about the difference between public and private agencies, which will be this next slide now.
Yeah, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Like David said, I'm Trey Rabun from Amara, and we're located in Washington State, in Seattle, in kind of Tacoma, Washington. So it's kind of the western part of our state. And yeah, me and my husband were foster parents for about 4 years. We had 2 placements on our journey to adopting our now 6-year-old son. We actually got him placed when he was about 15 months, and then he went to what's called kinship care. So he went to go live with a relative for a bit. And then while he was there, we got a call about a little baby boy that was in the office that needed a placement. And so we were his placement for about 3 months until he was able to reunify with his parents. And then we got a call saying, hey, remember that little 15-month-old boy you had 6 months ago? Well, he's now 20 months and we need to place him back into foster care or into a foster home. And so we welcomed him back shy of his 2nd birthday. And then, like I said, we adopted him when he was 4, and now we're our forever family. So I got that experience, and I just ran the numbers. I think I've worked with about 50 kids over my time as a social worker, and about a little over 30 of those were adopted, and another were reunified or placed with a relative for long-term placement. So yeah, talking about public and private, like Jill said, it really depends on the state you're in. Some states have privatized their child welfare system. So I think it's like Arizona and Florida, your only option would be a private agency to get licensed, but in most there is kind of the state option and the private, and I'm biased as well, that private just provides more support to you as the foster and adoptive parent. Typically with the public agency, their main goal is reunification, working with the birth parents, making sure their services are being met, offering them services, and then making sure that the kids, doing well in foster care. Well, that private agency, that social worker at the private agency is really there to support you as a foster parent and the kids in your home. So it's just an extra layer of support. So definitely always kind of explore your options and see what's out there in your state. And then like was mentioned earlier, definitely making sure if you do pick a private agency that you're picking one that is affirming to your family. So financial resources when you're fostering, because fostering is is heavily subsidized by government dollars. The actual process to become licensed should be free or very low cost. I know there are some private agencies around the country that may charge a small fee if you decide to go that route, but I know I think even private agencies are moving away from those costs. Like my agency, we used to have fees, but we no longer have fees to become a foster parent. So I think that's where the trend is, even with private agencies. And when we say low cost, obviously there's going to be some cost to get your house ready. If you're a first-time parent, you probably don't have a crib, a twin bed, bottles, clothes for kids. So all the typical things you would think about getting ready for parenthood. There would be a cost associated to get your house ready, but typically the process itself should be free. And as long as you're fostering, the state kind of gives you a stipend or foster care payment every month to kind of offset the day-to-day cost of parenting, because we know parenting is not cheap. It's going to be an expensive process. And so that the state offers that money to help offset that cost. And really that payment is based on the child's age and also kind of their level of special needs. So in our state, we kind of have 4 levels. Level 1 is kind of a basic level child. Level 2 has a little bit higher needs. Level 3 is a little bit higher, and then level 4 are pretty high needs kids. And so they have that thing. And then also as the kid gets older, they give you more money because we know teenagers eat a lot more food than a 2-year-old. So they want to offset those costs associated with parenting older kids. And then in terms of kind of the cost for adopting through foster care, that process of termination of parental rights in foster to adopt, that cost is covered by the state. The state is the one telling the courts, hey, we've decided that this kid or this sibling set can't safely return home, go to a relative placement. And so they're going to ask the courts and the judge to terminate parental rights. And so that's all covered through the cost of the state agency or the government, the state government. And then once that kid's become legally free, then you'll be working on finalizing that adoption. So there may be a cost there in you finding your own adoption attorney to kind of help finalize that adoption at the end. In our state, that fee is about $800 to $1,200, depending on the attorney you choose. But typically those costs are reimbursed to the family, at least they are in our state, through what we call a post-adoption program. So once you adopt, you turn in your receipts or invoice from that lawyer saying this is what I paid to adopt, and the state will reimburse you. Yeah, just knowing also that post-adoption is also a great resource for families who adopt from foster care, and that it has some services available to you after you adopt. So one huge benefit is that all kids in foster care are on Medicaid, so their medical, dental, mental health, all that is covered 100%. If you adopt through foster care, you have the option of keeping the Medicaid and not placing the kid on your private insurance, in which case you really won't have a lot of medical costs beyond adopting. Like my kid's on Medicaid, and if you're in a pretty resource area like I am in Seattle, all the top doctors and pediatricians accept that. And so that's a huge resource for families who adopt from foster care, knowing you have that Medicaid until the kid typically graduates high school. Another huge benefit of adoption is you get a federal tax credit. So once that the adoption is finalized, you work with your accountant to make sure that they know about this credit and get that applied. And it's typically most low and middle income earners see a huge, obviously, rebate or refund with their taxes through that. So that's another resource as well about foster care adoption. And then training resources. So like Jill mentioned, there's a lot of kind of upfront training when you first apply before you start that home study. There's typically like a huge training. Some states call it Pride. We call it caregiver core training in our state, but it's about 20 to 30 hour training that really just covers, every topic you can think about related to foster care, kind of who are the kids, kind of how does the system operate, kind of what's your role as a foster parent kind of within that system, talks about trauma and how, some tips on how you parent kids with trauma, understanding that a lot of the placements in your home may be kids who don't share the same race or ethnicity or religious background as you. So talking about the importance of honoring a kid's culture and ways you can do that in your home. So this covers a kind of a wide variety. And then once you're licensed, typically you have to relicense after a certain time period, which in my state is 3 years. And so as part of that relicensing, you have to take, a certain hour of kind of continuing ed hours. And so because foster care is, once again, subsidized by the state, there's just tons of free training that states offer or private agencies offer to their families. That's really focused on, just trauma or, attachments. We're really big on attachment right now and making sure families understand the importance of that. So really whatever you're looking to find or learn more about, there's typically a training or a workshop out there that you can help meet that need to continue kind of your training throughout. And then the Gays with Kids has some resources on their website as well about training resources.
Great, thank you so much, Trey and Jill. Okay, so now to an exciting part of this webinar, we're gonna bring in our foster dad, Tom Hove. We actually just published a story about him, which I'll drop into the chat function so you can take a look at that a little bit later. But so I'll just say before we get into this, that if you have questions for any of our panelists or for Tom, please use the Q&A function of the webinar feature so we can start amassing those, and we'll get through those. We'll kind of bleed this conversation into the next one. And so, Tom, I'm actually wondering if you can just start by introducing yourself a little bit, and I'm assuming that a lot of people that are on our webinars are coming to us not totally sure which path is right for them yet. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you and Doug, your husband, came to decide on foster care over other paths that were available to you.
Absolutely. Well, I so appreciate this, and I am excited to be on this panel and listening to everybody talk, and especially Amara. We are an Amara family. We went through Amara to become foster parents and go through our journey. My husband and I, my husband's been in law enforcement for about 18 years. He has worked with, you know, a lot of at-risk youth that he was an LGBTQ liaison for years, that he worked with youth that were in the foster system, had a lot of exposure to this vulnerable population. So for him, when it came time for us to talk about kids and, you know, what did we want that to look like, for him, it was a no-brainer. For me, when I got out of the military, I went to school for social work, and just being exposed to the various levels of social work and areas that we could be working in, and just learning about you know, the vulnerable populations, to include kids and foster kids. I mean, once again, it was a no-brainer for us that we were going to go into the foster system and go that route versus doing the other various ways. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Actually, I'm loving looking at these photos of you and your family, but I'm actually going to take us off the screen share so we can all be on the same grid and have a conversation together. Cool. So, and can you talk a little bit about, I think people get overwhelmed again by all the very practical and useful information that we just went over, and including all the great resources that we're rolling out every day, I guess with kids.com, but I do think that there is no beating talking to an actual foster parent about the experience, talking about the training, and especially the home study, which again is, in my experience, something that seems to freak people out the most. So can you kind of humanize that experience for us a little bit? Like, what was that like? Was it, what was the challenging parts of it, if any? What were the beneficial parts? Just both the home study and the training that you went through, if you could go into detail there a little bit more.
Absolutely. And when Jill was talking, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, yes, yes. I mean, your home is becoming, like she was saying, a facility. Like I mean, we had to go out and purchase ladders, escape ladders for our second story windows that the kids would be in. And I was like, no home in America has these, but we actually should. One, we should. A lot of the stuff that foster families are asked to do, like every home should be doing, you know. And so when we started to go through the interview process and you know, doing the questionnaires and things, it was like, oh my gosh, this is invasive. Like, you want to know what, you know? And so there was that piece of, but having our social workers talk about, you know, why they are asking the questions that they're asking. And, you know, like Jill was saying, that if there are any past traumas, anything like that, that, you know, how did you work through it? And, you know, for me, coming out of the military, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. My husband being in law enforcement, a similar thing. And so that was a conversation that we had to have with our social workers, and you know, but it was a great conversation, and it was, you know, an opportunity for us to talk about how we can use our lived experiences to benefit any child that might be coming into our home. And so, yeah, you know, and my husband, he owns guns, and when it came time to talk about guns and gun safety and everything, my husband was wanting to push back and be like, nope, this is how it is. This is my, you know, my right and everything. And I was like, at the end of the day, this is what the law says. And for us to become parents and welcome these kids into our home, we have to follow it. And I said, so let's just do it. And it's not about taking away rights or taking away any of that. It's just being mindful of what could be, and just making your home as safe as possible. And, you know, for us, like the medication lockup, we have a tackle box that we put all of our medications in and lock it up. And we still use that. We've since adopted both of our kiddos that we were placed within the foster system, but we still use that tackle box because, one, it's super convenient for travel, but it just makes sense. And, you know, it's something that our kids have tried to access and weren't able to, you know. And so there's a lot of great things that, you know, it might seem odd when your social workers or the state are asking you to jump through these hoops, but it really is for a reason. And, you know, the social workers are great with explaining it. And yeah.
Great. Yeah. mean, almost across the board, the foster parents that I've met over my years of doing this work, a lot of them go into the home study and the training aspects of this, if not like a little fearful, also a little resentful that they have to do it, especially when you see so many other people just, having kids willy-nilly. And, I know plenty of parents that could probably use this sort of training that aren't forced to in the way that foster and adoptive parents are. But almost across the board, I feel like if anything, people want more training, more resources, that it's a very valuable support system for foster parents. So and I'm curious, I also hear in your introduction and talking about your relationship with Amara, that it often does become a long-term relationship, that these aren't agencies that you work with just for a small amount of time, but this is something that you develop lifelong relationships that are very useful. So I'm wondering if you can talk about, so after the placement, after the adoption even, where do you go when you need additional kind of support, or when you have questions about anything, or do you feel like you still have that relationship? If you could just talk through what that looks like kind of post-adoption.
Yeah, and I think I mean, when our kids, well, when we were going through the process and just kind of learning of what resources are out there, and a lot of, I mean, the trainings and classes we were in, and they would bring in these resources to introduce themselves. They would start signing us up then before we even had placements, and we're saying, this is going to be ready and available for you once you do get a placement. And it's overwhelming in a very good way how many resources and organizations and whatnot are out there ready to wrap their arms around you and support you through this. I mean, we became parents pretty much overnight. Yeah, we had the crib and everything, but my husband and I were in Fred Meyer an hour before our daughter was brought here, throwing things into a cart in the baby aisle, and a lady was like, "Are you two okay?" And we're like, "No, we're not okay. Help us." So, but you become instant parents, and for us, we were open from 0 to 5, I believe. Boy, girl, race, we were open. And so we didn't know who was going to be coming in our door. And, but yeah, so then, going through all of this amazing support from Amara and other organizations in the community and nationally. And then post-adoption, we do call ourselves an Amara family. We went through 2 social workers while at Amara. But it was amazing. I mean, and these are people you're going to become vulnerable with, you're going to become real with. There were times where we would tell our social workers, like, yeah, we know that unification is the ultimate goal, but as somebody that has had this child in my home for 9 months, here's how I'm feeling. I need to be raw with you. I need to be real. And, they just sat with us and allowed us to express that and cry and all of that. I mean, they were on that journey with us. And so, I mean, and that is something that I don't think we'll be able to truly be able to thank our social workers for, because, especially us, my husband and I are here in Seattle, our families are in another state or on Eastern Washington. So we didn't have those shoulders to cry on, with your people. So those social workers really played a huge role, and we continue to go back to them since the adoption and make those connections and update and all of that stuff.
Great. So we're getting so we're also on Facebook Live. I'm not sure if I've said that yet. So hi to everyone that's watching there. And you are also welcome to ask questions in the comments. And we have one from a participant who's actually wondering how you decided to go with Amara. And I think this is a great question, just to hear about your thought process as to how you selected them over other options.
Yeah, and honestly, it came down to word of mouth. When you Google, private agencies and all of that, I mean, you're going to get lists and lists and lists. And for us, it came down to talking with folks that have gone, they, identified like us, they, had the same makeup as us. And, we asked, like, hey, what did this look like for you? And would you recommend them? And so we did get a lot of positive feedback. And so that's how we chose Amara. And that's what I would recommend anybody: do your homework, ask around. Some places might look great on paper, but they might not be as supportive as you would like, and vice versa. So do that homework and get ask around.
So what a very convenient resource, especially for us at Gays with Kids, is we really did try to vet and be very careful about the experts that we decided to work with, because we want to make sure that they have long track records of supporting the LGBTQ community, and that they know, their stuff, and that they're not, that it's not, it's not just, words being thrown to the wind, that they're actually supportive of this community in a very real way. Fortunately, we have a great partner in the Human Rights Campaign, which has its All Children, All Families database of agencies that it thoroughly vets. So if anyone's looking for an agency, that's a great place to start as well, to go to their listings and to find agencies that have received their top tier recognition. So I'm actually wondering if I can bring in Extraordinary Families and Amara here, both of who have received that top tier recognition. If you can just walk through both of a little bit of what that training was like and what the vetting process is like. And it's also, my understanding is it's a yearly certification. Is that right? Why don't we start with you, Jill? If you can just talk about what that process is like.
So when I came to join Extraordinary Families, they already had their Human Rights Campaign seal and were already involved with All Children, All Families. But I can tell you the annual training is extensive, a lot of great webinars, a lot, HRC does kind of sends us ongoing opportunities to do trainings. At our agency, we spend time talking about implicit bias on all levels, not just around gay and queer families, but families of color, and just want to make sure that we're always on top of using the right language, being sensitive, and again, being inclusive. And then on our, practice what we preach, our paperwork, our website, our recruitment efforts are always inclusive and affirming. I'll tell you what's really great. I just got an email from the state of California. They're updating their paperwork. So we have it's getting kind of standardized in California. So the entire state of California is using a sensitive language, inclusive language, which is so awesome. Love being a West Coaster.
Yeah,
So I mean, it's great because then it's just not us on our own as an agency, but it's really becoming, again, standardized. So, and every time we recruit a new social worker, we do a lot of front end training with onboarding, and in our interview process, we're asking people, do you have experience working with the LGBT community? Do you, are you open? And sometimes we get answers, and that's going to take pause in terms of, is this person going to be a good part of our community and be able to support our families in the way we, our vision and mission is all about that support. So we from beginning to end. And we've also had to do some advocacy efforts with working with the county when there's been one individual that may not be supportive. We step in very strongly to advocate for our families.
That's fantastic. And this, I guess I should contextualize this as to why it's so important to choose an agency that is so affirming of the LGBTQ community within the world of foster care in particular. There's been, I think it's 10 or 11 states now that have passed bills through their state legislatures that make it legal to discriminate against queer people, single people, all different types of people actually, based on, religious objections or whatever else. So this isn't kind of like an idle problem. It is, you do want to make sure that you're not having to go through that experience of being rejected by an agency just because they're homophobic or not inclusive, especially when there are great options in every state that you can work with that are affirming and will make sure that they are, treating your family with the respect that it deserves, and your journey to parenthood with the respect it deserves. So Trey, is there anything you'd add about the certification process from what Jill just said?
No, I think she nailed it. But I think one thing too is once you find the affirming agencies, if you're lucky enough to live in an area where there's multiple affirming agencies, I also think it's important to look at the customer service aspect. And Tom, I don't know if you remember this, but I have a keen memory of remembering every family I've ever met with. And I did recruitment and outreach. And I remember I met with Tom and his husband pre-application to kind of answer their questions. And not agencies will do that. So if you have questions, reach out and how quickly do they respond to your inquiry? Are they open and willing to meet with you and do things like that? And so I think that's another piece is once you find that affirming one, which one has really good customer service, that's probably a telltale sign. If they don't get back to you for 2 weeks from your inquiry, you're probably going to have a lot of communication delays down your process. So just thinking about that part as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So something else I want to get into a little bit. So we've already kind of touched on this, but there's an overrepresentation of LGBTQ kids in the foster care system and kids of color. So depending on who you are and your background, you could very well end up parenting children that is not from your same background at all. So I know, Tom, that you're part of a multiracial family. So I'm just curious if you can talk about the training or what kind of efforts that you made or that Amara helped you make in educating yourself or making sure that you were prepared to bring in children to your home that were not a part of your same background.
Absolutely. And my apologies, my internet, in the world of Zoom, my internet seems to be going in and out. So if I become choppy, don't let me become paused with an ugly face. So, but so with us, we, Amara gave us, oh my God, so much. I mean, there were support groups, there were classes that were specific on here's how to do, hair, kids with black hair, curly hair, diverse hair. Here's how to take care of that. Here's how to be culturally aware and sensitive. And so like, it's once again, it's overwhelming in such a great way of like, here's how to prepare, here's how to have these conversations, with about talking about white privilege with your immediate family, with your circle, with all of that, and what that looks like, because this is the reality. And I'm appreciative because Amara helped to guide us and to have these conversations and how to have fruitful conversations with folks in our life about this, and and then going to how to care for kids that aren't like us, and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot out there, and if it's not the agency, then there's somebody that we have found salons that were super patient with us and wanted to guide us through and wanted to walk with us, and just we were in there for hours for them to show us how to do our daughter's hair, and it's just that type of stuff. Beyond grateful. But the organizations, I keep saying Amara, they help to guide us through that and to get us to that where we could find those.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering, Trey, if you could just expand on, you kids from different religions or backgrounds, ethnicities, gender identity, sexual orientation. I mean, you could be any sort of number of different things that it'll be incumbent on the foster parents to make sure that they are honoring the background of the child that's being placed with them. Can you just go into a little bit more detail about those kinds of training opportunities and resources, or how you kind of walk people through also, what they are capable or not of doing in terms of becoming a foster parent?
Yeah, I think the big thing we do is just really have families do a self-assessment, right? Like, what does white privilege mean to you? Is that a new term? Is that a term you've known for 5 years and you're really comfortable in that positionality? Because it's, understanding that you have that privilege, but your children don't, especially when they get older, are not in the presence of you out in the community. So it's like, how are you going to prepare a kid who doesn't have that, and realizing there's going to be that discrepancy? But it's also an assessment of your life, your networks, right? If it's, most folks tend to hang out and be around folks who look and think like them, and so, which is fine, but then thinking about how are you going to diversify, are you going to send your kid to maybe to a different school outside of your zone school that's more diverse? Or a great way is what we call, like, there's your first networks, it's like your family, your friends, your coworkers, which you can't necessarily change, but your secondary network, doctors, therapists, which football team you sign them up for, what neighborhood you do that, even like what grocery store you shop at or what bank you go to, and thinking about ways you can like expose your kid to diversity in communities that look like them by stepping out and really diversifying that secondary network. So we do a lot of self-assessment, and then just like that also part, and then just, yeah, the very tangible resources around, caring for Black hair, but also why Black hair is so important, like why hair is so important in the Black community, like understanding the deeper cultural part of hair, and just like some of those tangible things as well. And we're now really venturing now, I think, if you said, as we learn more about the disproportionality of queer kids in foster care, we're really starting to talk more about that with our foster parents for all kids. So if you want a baby, that baby can grow up to be gay, right? So like if you adopt that kid, so it's like all families, regardless of the age, and understanding, like, kids now, earliest 2 and 3 can come out as trans and really have a deep understanding of their gender identity. They're saying kids are coming out, have a deep understanding of their sexual orientation by 7 or 8. So it's a lot younger than people think. So it's just broad education around that, and really excited. We're just going to launch at Amara a support group for caregivers caring for LGBTQ kids across the state. We were asked by one of our state agencies to create that, knowing that's a huge need and the gap that's not there. So we're really excited to kind of build out some of that thing. So it's, yeah, just, we have book lists and training lists, and really just like whatever a family needs, let us know, and then we'll kind of help guide them in whatever they need for resources to really build up their skill set or knowledge.
Amazing. I mean, again, that's my understanding, is it really is a holistic approach that you're looking at what kind of support you need, and then it's provided, and like Tom was saying, in almost an overwhelming amount, which is what it should be. Jill, do you want to talk? I know it's just as extensive at Extraordinary Families. Oh, sorry, Tom, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just want to say there, with us and having these conversations and talking about, our kids and then white privilege, I mean, we did get pushback, and we were able to turn to the resources that we were provided and say, hey, from our networks, we got pushback, and people don't see it as we do, and we were still taught, like, at the end of the day, we do what's best for our children, and and how do we navigate that, and so I just, they're just saying that might happen for sure.
Absolutely, and then having the support of good agencies that can help you know what to do in those situations, I think, is critical. And these aren't necessarily things that are going to come naturally to folks, and there's not any reason why they should if it's outside of your realm of experience. So Jill, could you talk about at Extraordinary Families? Because again, I know it's just as extensive, the training and support offered there. But so anything you'd add to kind of contextualize the sort of support that people can expect?
Yeah, no, I think Tom's experience and what Trey does at his agency is very similar to what we do, which is, asking families, take a look at your communities, take a look at your schools. Before you jump into this, make sure you have that preparation to support that child and that child's identity now and in the future. And I love the idea of the football team. I think we want our families to be resourceful, but we at the front end, like, hey, are you going to join the local soccer team with your kiddo? Or are you going to go across town and give your child those opportunities to play soccer with the kids that look like them? And that's a way to grow your community as well. But on the really front end, we ask families, look at your extended family, look at your friends, look at your community. Is your kiddo going to be the only child of color, or the only, is your extended family affirming and accepting? What's that going to be like down the road? So a lot of the same things. And again, because I've been doing this for over 20 years, it's so great to see the changes that agencies are making, and taking that holistic approach is really inspiring.
Yeah, agreed. And I'll just again make a quick plug for, given our last webinar was on specifically the topic of older LGBTQ youth. It's pretty shocking when you start to see the figures. In some cities, they estimate over 50% of the kids in foster care that are preteens or teens identify as queer or non-binary or trans. And these are obviously kids that are not feeling safe in their own households or kicked out of their households. So while it's obviously very possible for people to be housing children of all different backgrounds, you do not need to share the exact identity with the kids that you are housing. One of the foster youth on our webinar last week shared the story of the first time she was placed in the care of someone at the age of 14. She was already out and identified as a lesbian, and was placed with a family that was not accepting of her. So they, put her back into the system. And from that point on, she felt like she needed to be closeted for the rest of her experience in foster care. So, I think these things are the sorts of things that are starting to change, as you're saying, with more training and resources and support, but not always. And so the more LGBTQ parents we have in the system, I think better, even if you're providing that perspective for a kid that doesn't identify that way, it's obviously a very beneficial one. So it's hard to learn about this and not try to figure out some way to support in some way, which is why this next question I think is a great one, which is, if you were not able to be a foster parent for whatever reason, and this does really involve an honest assessment of your not just like capabilities as a foster parent, if you're that person to be able to provide that kind of support. But I give this option or this example often. I live in a 500 square foot apartment in Manhattan, in New York. I'm never going to be certified to be a foster parent because I have no room to put a kid in. But that doesn't mean that there's not plenty of different ways to support. And Tom, I think you were kind of starting to allude to this, or you all have been, which is it takes a village literally to do this. And there are multiple ways that you can find foster parents to support in other ways. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, Tom, about the community of support that you've been able to develop even outside of Amara, and how you find that support when you need it, friends, family members, just other community members, or if you do feel support in that way by your broader community.
Oh my God, absolutely. We do. I mean, we have other queer families that we have been able to build relationships with. We have just, I mean, like I was saying, the salon that we go to, you know, they've invited us over for dinner and say, hey, come in and meet our family, and let's talk, and let's, you know, build community. And you know, so it comes naturally, you know. And the thing that you know, just putting yourself out there, and I like Trey was saying, you know, seek outside of your community, your local, where your house sits, like go out there and put yourself out there. And it's going to come naturally. And you know, it's yeah,
Yeah,
it's yeah.
absolutely. So Trey, there are some like official ways that people can, yeah, I mean, obviously you probably know you're not too far removed from a family member who is, or someone in your community that is serving as a foster parent right within your own community. But there are more formal way. You mentioned kinship care, and you know, you could provide respite care. There's these other forms of less permanent forms of foster care. Can you talk about some other ways that people could be involved short of becoming a licensed long-term foster parent?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so respite care is, you know, you get licensed like a normal foster parent, but you don't take in kind of long-term placements. You kind of just have an open bed or two. And really what respite care is, giving other long-term foster parents a break. So, you know, a foster home just wants the weekend to have date night and just breathe. So they go to a respite home, which is another home, and so that the state knows that home is licensed and safe. And then that home provides respite for that family so they can, you know, get a break before they start to parent again. So yeah, respite care is always a good one, because you can kind of say yes when I'm open and not open, and kind of when you're available to do it, you can do it. Kinship care is a little bit different, because typically you're called upon to do kinship care. So like you get a call saying, hey, your nephew's in foster care, would you like placement? So it's a little bit harder to kind of plan for kinship care, but that's definitely a way. You know, volunteering, we have a lot of opportunities at Amara. Unfortunately, our biggest one was called our sanctuary program, which is essentially a house-like setting where kids just entering foster care went for about 3 to 5 days to allow the state to figure out best long-term placement for that kid. With COVID, it just was a really hard thing to keep open with so many people in and out. But we had kind of a staff on paid staff, and then volunteers to kind of care for the kids on a 24/7 cycle. So that was a really cool way to volunteer. I think mentorship is a really cool, like we have a local organization called Friends of Youth or something like that. And their thing is matching kids, kind of at-risk kids, but a lot of foster youth with a mentor, and they follow them for like years, like until they graduate, or like big brothers, big sisters. That's the type of model that often work with a lot of our youth and mentorship. So yeah, definitely a lot of ways to kind of yeah, get involved, and yeah, a lot of capacities.
Amazing. Anything you'd add, Jill, that you're aware of?
In terms of other ways that families can get involved.
Yep.
Yeah, so we have a program called Up for Youth, which is, and a lot of agencies have programs like this, where we provide support for kiddos who are older and have been in foster care at some point in their lives, and it's ages 16 to 26. And it's really centered around further education and or employment. And we also have a mentoring program in part of that. So the idea is that the outcomes are much better for young people when they have one adult in their lives. It doesn't have to be a parent. So we have volunteers that graciously volunteer their time, and they get matched with a youth, and you know, again, have that mentoring relationship. On the foster care end, in LA County, there are several agencies like ours that have an emergency shelter care program. It's a 21-day program where it's just a soft place for kiddos to land after hours and on weekends, so children don't have to end up in kind of a group home environment for the weekend. And so foster parents can, you know, new foster parents can volunteer to just kind of get their feet wet and care for kiddos. Sometimes it's only a day or two until the first court date, but it's up until 21 days. And so some families really enjoy that. Of course, we have a family who started that way, got their first kiddo, now they're adopting. So you never know what's going to happen there. They said, yeah, we're nervous, we just want to get our feet wet. But anyway, yeah, there's just so many ways to get involved and to be that grown up in a child's life that, you know, provides another perspective and another, you know, way to do things, another way, you know. So
Yep,
Yes.
absolutely.
Sorry, I'm losing my words.
No, not at all. That was very well said. All right, so we are at our hour mark, but I do want to just let you all have a quick moment to sign off. And if in doing so, if you could just give like your one best piece of advice for people that are considering doing this, why don't we start with you, Jill?
Don't give up. If you've got a goal, eye on the prize. I say, don't give up, whether that means you're in the process and you're just that, not with the right agency. There's other agencies out there. If you're fostering and, adoption is your goal. Anyway, I'm going too far into it, but don't give up.
That's great advice. And so as we're signing off here, I'm also putting in links to Extraordinary Families and Amara's sites on our webpage. So if you happen to be in LA or in Seattle, we can't recommend these two folks enough, but also just as experts, they can be useful resources. And also link to the story that we just published on Tom and his family on Gays with Kids. So make sure to check all that out. And Trey.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, definitely. I think don't give up. And I think we briefly talked about reunification. And I think that's a big fear of most foster adopt parents, that they especially want the younger kiddos. And I always tell families, reunification is hard in the moment because we're asking you to love on a kid forever and then break that bond potentially to reunify them back with their parents or with a relative. And so definitely take your time to grieve. You're breaking, the grief and loss process, we're breaking a bond. But for most families, and I can say for myself and families I've worked with, at a certain point, you look back at that reunification and I just feel so proud and just that I was able to help a family heal and put a family back together and reunify. And so just know, like, yeah, reunifications are hard in the moment, but when you step back 6 months, a year later, you just feel a lot of just gratitude and just feel good about the fact that you helped a family out on your kind of path to adopting. So it's definitely most families come back after reunification for second, third, fourth placements to adopt. So to say it seems hard in the moment, and not saying it is, but long term, I think you'll really find it rewarding knowing you helped the family reunify on your path to creating your own family.
Great. And Tom, your best piece of advice.
Go into it with an open mind and an open heart. There's going to be a lot of growth. There's going to be a lot of times where you are going to be asked to be incredibly vulnerable, sit in that vulnerability, and the most important thing is to love that child regardless of how long they're in your home, because the amount of time that you're able to love on them, it's going to make such an impact on them. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I would give.
Well, thank you again to our panelists, Jill Rosenberg from Extraordinary Families, Trey Rabun from Amara, and Tom Hove, who is a foster dad with the help of Amara. Our last series on this in celebration of Foster Care Awareness Month is going to be next Wednesday, and we'll be meeting a family that Extraordinary Families helps through the foster adopt process. So we're very excited about that. Definitely check it out. Check out our last two if you haven't yet. That should be up on our YouTube page and also on our website. And then stay tuned as we keep rolling out more and more resources on foster care. It's a fabulous option for people interested in becoming dads. And we'll see you hopefully next week. Thank you all so much.